Mary Ainsworth's original strange situation research identified three attachment patterns: secure, avoidant, and resistant. But a substantial minority of infants showed behavior that fit none of these categories cleanly: freezing in place, approaching the caregiver while looking away, or showing contradictory approach and avoid behaviors simultaneously. This fourth pattern, disorganized attachment, identified over a decade after Ainsworth's original work, turned out to carry the most significant long-term developmental risk of all. Mary Main and Judith Solomon identified disorganized attachment as a fourth attachment category in the mid-1980s, over a decade after Ainsworth's original three-category system, to classify infants in the strange situation who displayed contradictory, disoriented, or seemingly conflicted behavior toward their caregiver upon reunion, including freezing in place with a dazed or trance-like expression, approaching the caregiver while simultaneously averting their gaze, or displaying simultaneous approach and avoidance movements, behaviors that fit cleanly into none of the original secure, avoidant, or resistant categories. Disorganized attachment is theorized by Main and subsequent researchers to result from an unresolvable paradox facing the infant, in which the same caregiver, who is biologically the infant's primary source of comfort and safety during distress, is also, due to frightening, abusive, or severely inconsistent caregiving behavior, a source of the infant's fear itself, leaving the infant with no coherent behavioral strategy for approaching the caregiver for comfort, since approaching the source of comfort simultaneously means approaching the source of fear, producing the observed contradictory, disorganized behavioral patterns. Research consistently finds disorganized attachment prevalence significantly elevated among infants experiencing documented child maltreatment, infants of parents with severe, untreated mental illness or substance use disorders, and infants of parents with their own unresolved trauma or loss, particularly when that unresolved trauma manifests behaviorally as frightened or frightening caregiving behavior, since parents who are themselves dissociating or behaving unpredictably due to their own unresolved trauma history may inadvertently transmit disorganized attachment patterns to the next generation through this specific frightened or frightening caregiving mechanism. Longitudinal research following children classified with disorganized attachment in infancy into later childhood and adolescence finds significantly elevated risk for a range of difficulties, including externalizing behavioral problems such as aggression and conduct difficulties, internalizing difficulties including anxiety and depression, dissociative symptoms specifically, and broader difficulties with emotion regulation and social relationship functioning, making disorganized attachment classification one of the more robust early childhood predictors of later psychopathology risk identified in developmental research. Evidence-based attachment-focused interventions for high-risk families, including the video feedback intervention to promote positive parenting program, use recorded video footage of actual parent-infant interactions to help parents recognize their own frightening, inconsistent, or disengaged behavioral patterns and to actively practice more sensitive, consistent, and emotionally attuned responses to their infant's needs and distress signals. Randomized controlled trials of these interventions show measurable reductions in disorganized attachment rates among treated high-risk families compared to control groups. Because disorganized attachment appears to transmit across generations partly through parents' own unresolved trauma manifesting as frightening or inconsistent caregiving, early identification of high-risk families and provision of attachment-focused intervention offers a genuinely meaningful opportunity to interrupt this intergenerational cycle before it produces lasting developmental consequences for the next generation, representing one of developmental psychology's more direct, actionable applications of attachment theory to real-world prevention and public health practice. Disorganized attachment, identified over a decade after Ainsworth's foundational research, revealed that some infants face an unresolvable paradox when their primary source of comfort is simultaneously their primary source of fear, a pattern carrying significant long-term developmental risk, but one that evidence-based, attachment-focused intervention can meaningfully help address before that risk becomes destiny.